officials, leading experts, and representatives from various communities to introspect sectoral issues and concerns in order to assist formulation of a comprehensive strategy to evolve the metropolis's climate plan. We hope such efforts would help in making Namma Bengaluru climate friendly and that the process of decarbonization of the economy is undertaken in a just, equitable manner. More details, including reports and video recordings and video about the past webinars, are accessible on our website at esgindia.org. In last week's session, we addressed ways for securing biodiversity rich, healthy, socially inclusive, and economically viable commons in Bengaluru. In this session, making Bengaluru energy independent, we hope to engage in extensive discussions on energy usage in Bengaluru, exploring alternatives to conventional sources of energy, and most importantly, inquire if we need so much energy in the first place. Understanding Bengaluru's energy mix and consumption patterns is crucial to bring about awareness that is required to change our consumption patterns and to move towards generation and consumption of energy respectful of the principle of intergenerational equity. Bangalore's limitless urbanization is gnawing into the neighboring districts, limiting the capacitance of sustenance. The metropolis consumes over a third of the energy consumed in Karnataka. That is, the metropolis consumes over 4,000 megawatts of 11,500 megawatts consumed daily in the state. The energy consumed is almost twice as it was a decade ago. Meanwhile, high-end shopping complex, luxury living spaces, IT and allied industries that require enormous amounts of power 24/7 are expanding at an unprecedented scale. What does this mean in terms of sustaining the city's energy demands? And is it possible to sustain this growth? The city draws its electricity practically from all around the state and across India and from every possible source possible. That is thermal, hydel, wind, and solar to keep the city's engine running. In stark contrast, villages within the greater Bengaluru and elsewhere are starved of electricity. They face frequent power cuts and are unable to even lift water for irrigation. And to keep this ever growing power demand.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I think there is a problem with your mic. We are not able to hear it clearly.
Is it? Then I'll hold my mic closer. Is this better?
No, sir, your voice is getting breaking.
Okay. Leo, is it fine? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Yes, sir.
You can continue, Karthik.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We will take over later if your mic doesn't work.
Okay, perfect. So until a few years ago, the city too experienced severe power cuts. Many of my parents' generation, even mine, have had days of studying in candlelight or with a lantern. The concept of an uninterrupted power system is very recent. And the news of grid collapse at Raichur Thermal Power Plant Station or Sharavati was quite common. We have come a long way from those terms of undependability of electric supply. As we speak of energy demand and supply, we must be alert of various other forms than electricity that keep the metropolis moving. Bengaluru is the second largest consumer of petrol and the third of diesel amongst all metros, which means the dependability on private vehicular movement, which has increased manifold, is exerting a heavy price and fuel cost. And also the pollution it causes. Bengaluru is amongst the most polluted metropolises globally. Besides, the region is supplied with wood to five various rural households, industrial, and hotel demands till today. And it is difficult to estimate how many acres of forests or woodlands are felled to sustain this activity. Those who are forced to sacrifice their land, livelihood, or health to sustain this scale of energy demand are unaccounted for. Meanwhile, such sacrifices disappear in the blink of an eye in the metropolis's daily chores. Is it possible to keep the city running with this pattern of consumption and demand for energy? How are BESCOM and KPTCL sustaining this supply? What are the challenges of the petrochemical sector in supporting the fuel demands of the city? Is there a way we could shift to more sustainable sources such as renewable energy? And can those transitions be just for all involved? Will such transitions require Bangalore metropolitan planning authorities to imagine futures that are based on sustainable energy systems, in contrast with prevailing extractive and unsustainable systems today? And can we ensure all homes, maybe of rich, poor, or middle classes, institutions, offices, and government buildings, will find ways to consume less power and shift to alternate forms of locally generated power? So today's webinar aims to address these questions and help us understand what it takes to make the metropolis carbon neutral, to meet targets of the Paris Climate Agreement, and mainly inclusive, democratic, and in a just manner. Our esteemed speakers include Mr. M.B. Rajesh Gowda, an IAS officer who is presently working as the Managing Director of BESCOM from September 2019 till today. A few of the posts held by him prior to this position were Additional Deputy Commissioner of the Bangalore Rural District, Managing Director of Karnataka State Warehousing Corporation, Secretary of the Karnataka Housing Board, and also the Director of Department of Agricultural Marketing and Managing Director of Karnataka State Agricultural Marketing Board. And the next speaker would be Dr. Tejal Kanitkar. She is an associate professor in Energy Environment Program of the School of Natural Sciences and Engineering at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bengaluru. She is a mechanical engineer by training, and her research interests lie in the areas of energy, development, and climate policy. She has worked on trying to interrogate perspectives from natural sciences, engineering, and social sciences to understand the interconnected aspects of energy production and access, scientific and technological advancement in the sector, and policy shifts in instruments. In terms of their importance for ensuring the development and economic well-being of people, especially in the area of acute environmental crisis such as climate change. The next speaker would be Mr. Chokkalingam. He is an entrepreneur living off the grid for the past 15 years. And he is also a mentor at Gram Seva Sangh. He is actively pursuing self-sufficiency at home and his neighborhood to help communities to self-sustain themselves. Finally, would be Mr. Nagesh Agde. He is a Kannada journalist and commentator on the environment, energy, and development. He has a master's degree each from IIT and JNU. He has written some 40 books, mostly on science and environment. Many of his writings have become textbook lessons today. At present, he is a visiting professor at Indian Institute of Journalism and New Media. So before we start the discussion today, I will quickly go over a few housekeeping rules. Everyone is requested to keep their phones on silent. All are requested to ensure that they are on mute, except for the speakers. Each speaker will be making an intervention for about 10 to 15 minutes. Once all such interventions are over, we will have a round of questions and answers and discussion. Anyone wishing to ask any question is requested to do so by posting it in the chat box below. If time permits, we will facilitate direct conversations between speakers and the audience. So,
I just want to
Anushka,
say
yeah.
that there is a problem with Karthik's microphone. If you can't fix it, then one of us will take over. So on that note, I request Mr. Gowda to come in and make his intervention.
Good evening, everyone. This is Rajesh, Managing Director of BESCOM. I've been here for about maybe 18 months now. So 18, 19 months. I mean, energy sector, we have generation which is taken care of by KPCL. Then we have transmission, which is KPTCL, and distribution. We are a distribution company. So the challenge before us is that as of now, the points that are given here appears to be, securing electricity supplies to Bangalore, dwell on improving grid efficiency, and to promote decentralization of energy production, which are all very relevant. So I would like to take the journey of energy sector, as the anchor was saying that as kids we were seeing a lot of power cuts and till 2017 we were a deficit state. That is, power deficit was there, and after this Pavagada plant which came up and a lot of other plants which have come up, we are a surplus state today, and there is energy surplus with us. So, but that comes with a cost also, because a lot of investment has happened in the in coal plants, thermal plants. So that issue we need to address when the galloping technology has given us an opportunity to reduce the power purchase cost and also and less carbon footprints. That is the solar plants, which recently the bids that we saw from SECI was about 2 rupees. So overall average power purchase cost for us is it's got two components: variable cost and the fixed cost. So variable cost is almost about 3 rupees, and plus fixed cost is about maybe 101 rupee 30 paisa. So all we have a mix of purchases that we do, from hydel to thermal, and then solar, wind. So solar and wind are independent power producers, where we procure, and we have a fair share allocation from the central generating stations, which comes with a cost where the transmission cost of the periphery is about 1 rupee 25 paisa. So that would be saved if the state itself, as you have mentioned, decentralization of energy production. That would really bring in a lot of, as Anchor was talking about, equity. Yes, equity is possible. I mean, when inclusiveness is possible, when the energy cost comes down, which also means that the power purchase cost comes down. If you see BESCOM's overall, revenues, it is about maybe 22,000 crores. Out of this, 83% is power purchase cost and transmission. That is, power purchase cost is about almost, it comes to about 19,000 crores. So any saving in the power purchase cost can definitely be transferred to the consumers. So that's really not happening without a lot of cheap power that can be there, and a lot of reforms that will be there. So overall, if you see, we have from the coal sector, which is still predominant. But Karnataka is, it's a proud thing to say that we are #1 in the country as far as renewable integration is concerned. So we have a big share of solar and wind. If you see the day requirement, daytime demand, which went up to, say, about 14,000 megawatt. So let us say it's average about 12,500 megawatt. Out of this, when we take out wind, what we get is about almost 4,500 megawatt. On a good windy day, it goes up to more than 5,000 megawatt. So the requirement of 12,500 megawatt or 12,000 megawatt, almost about 40% is coming from renewables. That's one proud thing that we are doing. Now that also comes with a challenge. Suppose further integration of further renewable integration becomes a challenge for us, because after 6 o'clock, suppose if we think of adding a fair chunk of solar, because solar, as I said, solar panels, I mean, the rates have come down, the energy cost has come down, and recent bids has come up to 2 rupees. And Government of India, MNRE, is also supporting the states with a lot of central financial assistance. Recently, the Kusum A and Kusum C scheme. The Kusum C scheme talks about solarization of feeders. Our agriculture feeders and the habitation feeders are separated completely. So Anchor was mentioning that there is an issue of farmers not getting electricity for about, I mean, a big chunk, but it is the policy of the state that it is about 7 hours of electricity that we are giving them. And in most places, maybe in 2 shifts, we are giving that. And Government of India, Ministry of Power, MNRE, so it's trying to give 1 crore 5 lakh as subsidy for 1 megawatt, where people can come forward and solarize the feeders. Each feeder will have about, let us say, 300, 350 IP sets. So daytime continuous 7 hours power can be there. And if you see, as Karnataka, out of about 70,000 million units of energy which is required, 22,000 million units is consumed by the IP sets of these farmers for agriculture. So imagine if 22,000 million units can be completely, after solarization of these feeders, daytime agriculture power can come from solar. To a big extent, it can, I mean, power purchase costs can come down, including transmission costs can come down. And that's where high energy charges, which always ESCOMs are accused of, can really come down. And also that would have, I mean, if in the journey of security, affordability, then stability of the grids, that is stability and sustainability. Sustainability and affordability can really go together, and that's what the fulcrum of discussion today. So that's really, you know, a possible thing. But the challenge for us is, after 6 o'clock, suppose I completely want to solarize the feeder and change the, you know, complete I mean, agriculture load can be shifted to solar during daytime. So additionally, I would be adding about 10,000 megawatt on a reverse bidding, basically without any investment as of now, because after the CFA, a lot of buoyancy is there, and it's the private sector which is going to invest, and 25 years they'll get every month they'll get their charges, and that would be a big buoyancy where we can have 10,000 megawatt of solar, completely changing the agriculture load to solar. But it is equal to about 2,000 megawatt of thermal. So as of now, if you look at the daytime, about 12,500 or 12,000 megawatt, out of this already about 4,500 megawatt is coming, and another 4,000 megawatt for, I mean, maybe about 3,000 megawatt will come from this 10,000 megawatt of, I mean, because the CUF is about 19%. Now, what will happen after 6 o'clock, unless until we have a certain different modalities, because the whole of the 7,000 megawatt will go out of the grid, and the requirement of night will be about, let us say, about maybe 11,000 megawatt, or maybe sometimes in April it's about 12,000 megawatt once again. So maximum will go. So I mean, that's a challenge before us. Can we have storage, pump hydro storage, or we can have battery storage, so that about 20% of the requirement of now that can come back to the grid? That's a big challenge before us. And as far as rooftop, which we have white roof, which we have discussed, I don't know, people in Bangalore, because if you look at the policy, we should have had about by this time 2,400 megawatt of the whole state, and 1,200 megawatt in BESCOM jurisdiction, which is about 8 districts, and about 60% of this should have come from Bangalore. Participation of the citizens, even after a lot of efforts by BESCOM, is not there. I mean, we are still not able to understand that on a net metering basis, if the consumer is going to, I mean, stands to gain out of this. Suppose, let us say he is using about maybe 200 or 300 units. So 50% can come from his own solar, which would definitely cost about 3 rupees, while he'll end up paying 7 rupees. So 50% saving is there. But still, our achievement in Bangalore is about not more than about 140 megawatt or 150 megawatt for the last, from 2014 onwards. So Government of India, Ministry of Power, MNRE once again has come out with a big push, where they are saying that they will actually subsidize the consumer, or they will give a central financial assistance of about 40% in case of less than 3 kilowatt, where the consumer wants it to, I mean, his rooftop to be solarized, and about 20% in case of less than more than 3 kilowatt. So that would be a big support from the government, and we are going to have professional vendors where it will be a this one where Bescom will be in the loop. So I would request that Bangaloreans should really come forward, solarize their roofs with the subsidy provided by Government of India. Bescom will be there to ensure that the specs and warranty and due diligence is taken care of, which we will definitely do that. So now that is there, and the portal is open. It's called Saura Gruha Yojana. Consumers should start. Those who want to know, those who have their roofs, they should start registering with in the portal, so that once the vendor comes, so there is a tripartite arrangement between MNRE, then this vendor and Bescom, so that consumer also will get to stand to benefit from this. So this is where solarization of roof is a challenge for us. So two things. Number one is where agricultural load can be shifted to solar during daytime, and solarization of these roofs, which we have our own challenges, where the small roofs have to be aggregated. But many studies have been are conducted, and Bangalore has a good if you look at the solar, we are really, it's a wonderful thing, because we have blessed with the solar radiation of 5.4 to 6.2 kilowatt hour per meter square per day, 240 to 300 sunny days. So this advantage of reducing power purchase cost, then having less carbon footprints, and finally less energy charges, which will attract investment and employment to Bangalore. So all this is revolving around a big transformation that all of us can really now contribute, and we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your inputs about the challenges faced by Bescom, about the solar power after 6 p.m. And yeah, that's definitely something moving forward we need to tackle with storage solutions, or as you said, water-based solutions. So moving forward, I would ask the rest of the participants to leave any questions you have for Mr. Rajesh in the chat box, and we'll be moving forward to Ms. Tejal Kanetkar. Ms. Tejal?
Yes, sorry. I'm struggling to hear you a little bit, so I didn't realize that you had said that I'm on. So thank you very much to the Environmental Support Group for having me on, and that was a very enlightening presentation by Mr. Gowda. I hope I am audible.
Yeah, perfectly audible.
You are audible.
So I want to sort of, contextualize my contribution a little bit, sort of moving out of, Bangalore and electricity specifically a little bit, because I think when we talk of, given the introduction and the concept note also that you have circulated, I think when we talk about energy consumption in India or in Indian cities, there is a larger context to it, which I think is an important one that we should not forget, especially when the discussion revolves around development, equity, and issues like this. So if we look at the most recent, the last year was a bit of an odd year with COVID impacting and the lockdowns impacting energy use quite substantially across sectors. But if you look at 2019, for example, our per capita energy consumption was around 7,000 kilowatt hours. And this is for energy, not just electricity. Overall primary energy consumption, around 7,000 kilowatt hours per person, which is about less than 30% of world average. So if you look at the US, it's 80,000. It's So we are at 7,000, the US is at 80,000 kilowatt hours per person. But of course, the US is no benchmark for doing anything sustainably. But if you look at other developing countries as well, Indonesia, for example, is 9,000, Brazil is 16,000, South Africa is 26,000, China is 27,000. So amongst the large number of developing countries, emerging economies, if you will, we are also quite low. So electricity consumption also, we are around 1,000 kilowatt hours. It's a similar story in comparison with other developing countries as well. So the reality is that much of the country, and this includes urban India, does not really have access. I mean, having a connection doesn't mean you have access to energy. It does not use as much energy. But of course, the story cannot stop at the all India level, because averages, as we know, hide a lot. Because within the country, the story is one of extreme inequality. Now, very often it is characterized as an inequality between the urban and the rural. Right? So if you look at the per capita consumption, and I have data which is slightly dated from the NSSO, which speaks of which shows that the urban total per capita energy consumption of urban India is almost 90% higher than the per capita consumption of rural India. So this is, of course, and concentrated in the urban areas are modern energy sources, which is electricity and LPG. Whereas if you look at kerosene, for example, the use across urban and rural is more or less similar, in fact, slightly higher in terms of per capita in the rural. And of course, traditional sources such as firewood, etc., are much higher in the rural. But the story is not, it does not stop here as well. Within the urban and the rural also, there is a huge disparity. So for example, if you look at what the electricity consumption now, not energy, but electricity consumption, in the urban areas, the richest income decile uses 45% of the total electricity, whereas the poorest income decile uses 6%. So I was actually quite surprised when Mr. Gowda said that, there is that even the highest slab for domestic consumption in Bangalore actually pays less than the average cost of supply. One would think that the highest slab at least paid equal to the cost of supply, if not higher than that. So it was a little surprising. I don't know whether it has it's a result simply of the last particular year, which has been very peculiar in terms of the fact that most people have consumed more at home instead of at the workplace. They've spent most of their time at home. So maybe has the Regulatory Commission taken that into consideration while revising tariffs? Maybe something that we can get some clarity on. But broadly speaking, there is a huge disparity in terms of how much the richest income decile versus the poorest income decile actually use in terms of electricity here. But of course, when you say the rich income decile in an Indian city, one should remember that this is we are not talking about the super rich here. This includes people who earn more than 10,000 rupees per month. So, somebody with a salaried job also ends up in this bracket. So you have to take this with a pinch of salt. There is a fair amount of the middle classes, if you will, in this particular section. Even in rural areas. So this disparity actually exists not just in urban areas, but even in rural areas. So, I mean, I'm saying that the rural-urban divide typically is not necessarily, in my opinion, the best way to look at this. The distribution is highly unequal even in rural areas. And it's around the same. The 6% of the energy used in rural areas is by the lowest income decile and about 43% by the highest income decile. And in fact, the urban poor do much worse as compared to the rural middle income deciles when it comes to energy use. The rural poor and the urban poor are fare equally badly. But I would submit that even this is only the partial story. It's not the full story. And that's because I think that energy use in the urban energy systems and urban energy use is typically in the literature characterized as a consumption problem. Cities as islands of consumption. And this, I think, ignores the historical process of the development of the city, the accumulation and the movement of capital in the city, and what the city provides as, what is its transformatory potential, as well as what does it provide? Why does this, this difference exist? So here is sort of framing the question slightly differently. Is the city a place of production and therefore a place of consumption, or is it the other way around? Is it simply a state, a space of consumption? And if you, I would submit that the question changes and the way you look at it changes if you think of the city as primarily a site of production. You use energy for production, the energy that is embedded in infrastructure, because if you look at operational energy, you might not find too much, but there is a lot of energy embedded in the infrastructure that actually the city has, which is far higher as compared to rural areas. You have energy for services, which are provided on a much wider scale in cities. You have, of course, domestic energy use, and then energy for transport and for running urban systems, water, sanitation, all of this. So if we focus entirely on domestic consumption, what happens is we lose out on our on actually the bigger picture, the amount of consumption that is related either to productive activity directly or embedded in energy infrastructure. So I think we need to expand the scope of the discussion to understand why the city consumes what it does and what can be done. Can we think of the city as the control volume and say that, can we do what we need to do? Can the city become sustainable? Does this sort of, in what way does this fit with our understanding of the division of labor? So the city produces, for example, things that the village doesn't. The village produces things that the city doesn't, and there is a reason, an economic reason, if you will, for this kind of separation. But what does it mean for sustainability? And to what extent, therefore, this can be mediated within given economic structures, within the given economic social relations? To what extent can this be mediated to ensure sustainability as well as equity? I think becomes very important. So if you look at, coming back to energy, if you look at there's very little primary energy use in the city, except for in productive activity outside of industry. So you might have some amount of, you don't use crude oil and coal directly. Some smaller cities, maybe there's some firewood, but crude oil, coal, etc. is concentrated in industry. There are high amounts of primary energy use that is embedded in the urban infrastructure, in all the construction. The built environment of the city basically includes a lot of embedded energy, which does not get very often counted when we speak of this. Even when we speak of green buildings, for example, the construction of the buildings is hardly ever a part of the conversation. What is focused on really is how to make them less energy, make them use more sustainable and use less energy in operational terms, meaning after they are built. So in terms of secondary energy use, of course, electricity is the most predominant. You have industrial, commercial, domestic use, as well as public works, water supply, public lighting, sanitation, and transport. Railways, metros, etc. need electricity. You have other secondary sources, like LPG, kerosene, petrol, and all of these that are also used. But that's again a different story. And electricity is connected very closely to the functioning of other urban systems, other service delivery systems. Like I said, electricity, transport and water and sanitation, it is essential for some of these services that are provided in the city. And if the electricity system breaks down for whatever reason, either inside or outside the city, or is unreliable for whatever reason, then you have a problem. Because you've seen it during the Chennai floods, Mumbai, etc., during extreme events, which we are likely to see much more in the future. Resilience means there has to be diversity. You cannot concentrate your energy sources to one particular kind, either renewable or fossil fuels, if it has to be resilient to extreme events, which we are likely to see more often. So solarizing a large amount of the city, even if it is possible. And I would submit that it may not be possible beyond certain domestic and commercial uses, may actually make the system a little less resilient. And that is something that I think we need to think about when we talk of a transition. The grid is already seeing, I mean, Karnataka, Mr. Gowda spoke about this, Karnataka has a huge amount of renewable energy input. It's absorbing much more than its purchase obligation as mandated by the Regulatory Commission, because a lot of renewable energy systems are based here. And it's leading to a cost. You have idling costs of the existing fossil fuel plants, and you have, which you have to pay, the capacity charges have to pay. BESCOM pays a huge amount of capacity charges for plants that it is not using capacity for, the Kudgi plant, for example, right? So, but nevertheless, so what I wanted to say is to think of the city as sustainable simply in terms of what can be done here may not necessarily work out in the long term. Might if we think of only energy systems. So energy systems have to be thought of in their interconnections with the other systems. So I would submit, for example, I mean, and coming to the end of my contribution, I would submit that there is, of course, what we know already is a lot of scope for efficiency. For example, demand side management, green buildings, CFLs have been a huge, they've been a success story all across the country. But we can't restrict our understanding of efficiency to the use of electricity alone, but there has to also be some efficiency in planning the city to be able to promote better use of the limited sources of energy that we have. So for example, what about housing, right? Is the provision of housing by the employer close to the workplace, right? Does it make more sense in the fact that, you might have used then less energy for transportation? You might have, mandated transportation services provided, public transportation services provided by the employer to its employees, who live close to the space of employment, because that's a huge amount of the city's energy use. It's not just electricity. It is this transportation that uses a lot of electricity. And we've had this before. Bangalore, for example, is a city of, employer-provided housing. They are in the area I live also, there are there. And this has been the history of industrial spaces, for example. We've gone away from this in the suburban model. But the suburban model, I would submit, is really inefficient and highly energy consuming. So if you want to look at a sustainable city, then thinking about how housing is provided to the large workforce that works here becomes an imperative thing. The other thing is things like localized markets, provisioning of daily needs close to the home, notified street markets, provisioning of green lighting for these markets, etc., is also possible. Because I would say that we can talk about it quite a lot, if some of these schemes take off, it is great. But a large section of the city, and Bangalore included, is poor, will not be, even at subsidized rates, be able to put solar units on their rooftop, or a lot of them don't even have rooftops. Okay, but think about the slum areas, etc. So if you're talking about equity, then the scope for local generation, for domestic use, etc., is limited. We can do this in commercial spaces. We will have a problem when we are talking about covering large productive use, even in hospitals where compression systems, air conditioning, etc., are needed. How is it that we're going to provide that energy? So I would say that let us connect this to larger systems of replanning the way in which our energy provisioning needs to happen, by replanning the way in which the city grows itself. And then we may be able to address some of these questions, if not fully, at least partially. If you have more efficient planning, you might reduce energy efficiency, but if you want to provide equitable access, you actually might increase energy consumption, right? So accounting for that increase in energy consumption, in what way should you even aspire for equity, is something that we need to think about quite seriously as we go ahead. I'll stop my intervention there. Thank you.
Hello, I hope I'm audible now. Am I?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, ma'am, for such a vast and in-depth analysis of energy in urban structures and its social impacts. And now I would like to call Mr. Hegde to speak about. Hegde, idira?
Yes, I am there.
You can
But
start, sir.
you broke the queue. According to your own introduction, I'm supposed to be speaking the last. Anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can go on.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yes.
Audible? Okay. So good evening to everybody, especially Leo and Karthik. And so nice of you to have arranged this webinar. In fact, my memory goes back to 35 years ago, when there used to be many civil society agitations, especially against Kaiga, against Sharavati tailrace, against Bharti, etc. We were against all major environmentally destructive ones. And as an alternate, we used to present not 5, 6, we used to present 14 different varieties of alternate energy sources, decentralized sources. And we were submitting that to the government of Karnataka and government of India, trying to convince them that it is essential for us to go for alternate. And I suppose even Leo used to attend some of those. Maybe he was a high school student or a college student. He used to attend many of our road shows in those days. Today, now I'll be talking mostly about the alternate energy scenarios. I'll not talk much. I want my pictures to speak. Give me a minute. Am I sharing my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Can you see the screen? Can you see the pictures?
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening.
Huh? Somebody talking there? Yes. Making Bengaluru energy independent. What is that? One second. I'll be speaking, I'll give you a basic picture of the present scenario. I look at the energy scenario of Bangalore in two different ways. One is the external energy and the other one is the internal energy. With external energy, yes, we have the hydroelectric from Kali, from Linganmakki, yes, we have fossil fuels of different kinds, both petroleum as well as coal and gas, etc. We have nuclear energy coming into Bangalore, solar imported maybe from Pavagada elsewhere, and wind also. Just as Mr. Rajagowda was telling, it's a mixture of things. I'm not going to give you details of that. It's been already given. What I'll be talking about is solar rooftop, sewage biogas, solid waste biogas, dairy waste, and biogas. When I speak of biogas, it is both electricity as well as heating energy and mechanical energy together. Biodiesel, especially non-edible oil seeds, and wind energy. And I'm not going to discuss anything about the external source of energy. Now, when we come to solar rooftop, yes, we have done extremely well in the beginning. Look at this, world's first solar power cricket venue, Chinnaswamy Stadium, Bangalore. So it's the beginner's enthusiasm. And yes, we are proud that our international airport is also generating 3 megawatts solar energy. Although the demand is about up to 11 megawatts, they are planning to purchase another, maybe I think 11 megawatts or so, totally making it up to 15 megawatts. And yes, this one is again, they're trying to set up some more solar panels elsewhere. I'm not going to dwell much on this. Even BESCOM is inviting expression of interest. to produce something like 30 megawatts. So this is just my rather sweeping things about solar energy, clean energy. Now let's talk about the cleansing energy. We all remember this, right? This is Jog Falls, and it is said that Sir M. Vishwesvaraya, after seeing this, said that what a waste of energy. It has Raja, Aurora, Rocket, and Rani. Now I want to bring a altogether different picture. Okay, this is our Raja, Akbar. All this garbage being dumped into deep ravines all around Bangalore in the discarded quarries, etc., etc. And just as you have in Jog Falls, Raja, Barora, you have Mundur, Mavalipura, Subramanyapura, Lakshmipura, Benalli, Mittaganalli, the latest one. And here also we can exclaim that what a waste of energy. Just like what Sir M.V. exclaimed when after seeing the Jog Falls. Anyway, we have now finished Jog Falls, except during rainy season. There is no Jog Falls at all. I hope, I suppose that we'll be able to finish these garbages by converting them into energy. You see, this is what Mr. Fuller. Pollution is nothing but the resources we are not harvesting. We allow them to disperse because we have been ignorant of their value. I'll be speaking about three kinds of waste being generated: liquid waste, solid waste, and slurry waste. This is yesterday's Prajavani. It has given full details of what kind of liquid waste we are pouring out. And here I want you to look at this 1400 MLD million liters per day wastewater. And there are 34 STPs, sewage treatment plants. But together, only about 50% of the wastewater is being treated. Only 550 MLD is being treated. The rest of them are allowed to go away. And all STPs in Bangalore are capable of generating energy. It's been proven. Technology is available. Bottling of biogas from this sewage is possible. And we have seen it elsewhere, all over the world. Here is the tabulation, various countries like Luxembourg, United States, etc., etc. Electricity being generated via biogas. Electricity generated from sewage biogas. All countries have been doing it for the past 15, 20 years. Okay. And Bangalore has made a very, very faint beginning. When was it? It was in 2017. It wanted to produce 1 megawatt of electricity out of sewage treatment plant. And I have never heard what had happened afterwards. I don't get any detail from that. Now, 60 MLD plant was supposed to be treated. MLD of wastewater was supposed to be treated, and 1 megawatts of power was supposed to be generated. And it could have had a benefit, a downstream benefit, because you could clean up a lot of Bellandur Lake there by treating and producing, but nothing is happening as such. And the Vrishabhavati is flowing as it had been flowing for the past 35, 40 years or so. Strange thing is that BWSSB is spending 390 crore rupees as power charges to get water from Kaveri or from borewells, etc., and spending electricity in sewage treatment itself. Don't blame me if my data is quite old. The BWSSB website shows the latest figure, that of 2014 and 15. Don't blame me about that. For example, STP in Kumarkripa could generate biogas for its own hotel and canteen, etc., etc. And the technology is available, but not a single STP out of 34, whatever, has a facility to collect biogas, not a single one. That despite the fact that Prime Minister himself 2 years ago was emphasizing on producing wastewater sludge can also be used to generate electricity. He faced severe criticism, but to be fair, he was correct. As I showed you in a little tabulation earlier, so many countries have been producing it. This is one STP, rather STP kind of a machinery set up in Dakar by Bill Gates. I mean, not by himself. He funded it. Interesting thing is that this would generate electricity with the help of the sludge it is treating. And the sludge would generate heat and then generate electricity, and that would make that water potable. This was way back in 2014. The technology was proven. Bill Gates himself drank that water. Even now you can watch in YouTube how he directly drinks that sewage water after getting it treated. And that produced electricity that's required for that treatment. Singapore, yes, it has become a museum. Rather, it's become a tourist attraction. They are producing new water, potable water. Again, where the MPs themselves come and drink it and show it to the people that we can drink this water. And yes, this is the latest one, again by Bill Gates, reinvented toilet exposition. How this toilet sludge can be utilized to produce energy as well as produce potable water. What are we doing? Away in Senegal, such a good country, it is producing. Here, we are setting up a Yalanka power plant that is sucking the water from Jakkur Lake. Actually, ideally, the Jakkur Lake itself should have produced electricity and clean water. But this plant is taking up this Jakkur water to cool itself, as a cooling water for cooling purposes. This is supposed to produce 370 megawatts of plant, and it should have been commissioned by 2018. We haven't heard much about that. It has not started yet. We heard only one little big noise. Last year, there was some kind of a thing exploded there. Then only it made news. Otherwise, this has not yet taken off. Completion is not yet been commissioned. But what is happening is that Jakkur Lake could go dry. Some scientists were telling this power plant could jeopardize the survival of the lake. Sharat Chandra Lele from A3. If this lake runs out of water, because the power plant is sucking water from here, and yes, it will be used up by the power plant. Now this entire STP is also being run by the same company, but I don't know what is the situation now. Nothing much is coming up. Coming back to our ethical use solid waste fall. Our solid waste is enormous, you know all that. Let's now take a look at the solid waste scenario. Again, I'm showing the Philippines example, where they are generating nearly 12 million residents are making use of the energy that's being produced out of their waste dump. Again, local example, Pune. In Pune, they have shown that they can produce out of the garbage, they can produce electricity via methane gas. This is running for the past 6 years, 7 years now. Recently, this Siddhi, Karnataka to get its first waste to energy plant. When was it? It was 2020, just 6 months ago, first one. Whereas all over the world, technology is quite common now. This new plant, he has inaugurated, and he will say this new plant in Bidadi would produce 11.5 megawatts of power using 10 acres of land. The first waste to energy plant in the state, only around 600 tons of waste out of total Bangalore's 5,000 tons, nearly. Only about 12% of garbage will be converted into electricity. This will result in annual savings of 14 crore rupees. Chief Minister told the media that Karnataka is taking a leap in green energy by setting up such a plant. It has not been set up. The land is just earmarked. Very basic preliminary work is going there. I don't know, it might take another 5 years. According to experts, again, Institute of Science, Center for Sustainable Technology, Bangalore can generate up to 19 lakh cubic meters of biogas per day, which can be LPG substitute. According to Bangalore University researchers, 300,000 LPG cylinders can be filled every year using our own garbage dumps. Let me come to the other varieties of dumps. This one is in Kannada. ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನ ಮದುವೆ ಮಂಟಪಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷ 339 ಕೋಟಿ ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಮೌಲ್ಯದ 943 tons high quality food is getting wasted. Marriage halls full of cashew nuts and saffron, ghee, etc., etc. It wastes 943 tons of food. Is there any facility to convert it into biogas, methane, and generate electricity? We have not heard. Only one or two little feeble attempts were made. I had seen actually one in Double Road, where the Double Road canteen was being run by using this garbage gas, but never heard of it. Let's now come to the solid fuel. So far, I've been talking about sludge, garbage as a gas, solid fuel. We know this everywhere. At any day, at least 150 places in Bangalore, you can see plastic being burnt. Everywhere, anywhere. It is illegal. Still then, we just tolerate it. We don't say anything. And that is a full energy thing. I'll tell you what. This is what we see in Magdi Road, if you happen to see. This is an example again from Pune. Here, a very interesting couple have started producing what is it called? Black oil. They do destructive distillation. They collect plastic from households. Nearly about 400 household people, they contribute plastic garbages, and that garbage is collected, taken to a drum. It's a sealed drum, and there it's heated with its own energy, and what you get is a fuel oil. Dark, almost it looks like the basic oil, tar, but that has a lot of value. Cement factories make use of it. Many brick factories, they make use of that oil. The plastic being again energy producing liquid. That's it. We have not heard of, we don't have a single plant anywhere in Bangalore.
So, sorry for interrupting. Another 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll finish it off.
Yep.
More than that. Now let me come to the biggest wasted energy. That's about dairies. I visited with my students some of the dairy complexes around Kumbalagodu. Huge dumps of cow dung is there. Now, cow dung can be easily converted into biogas. It's being done 50 years in Malnad, in my area. Every household has got a biogas converter. We have such lively example. For example, Anandwan Smart Village, where 5 tons of cow dung is being converted into energies. There is hydrogen as a clean energy possible. The latest technology is that solid waste can be utilized to produce hydrogen directly. It becomes much more cost effective. I don't know what. Now coming back to the solar again, this participatory and inclusive, that's the basic question, isn't it? If BESCOM is inviting expression of interest, yes, if it is producing 30 megawatt, no, you are not involving the common man. Common man need to be involved in this one. That just as Rajesh Gowda ji has just raised this topic, that why we are not involving common people, not as many people as required. But there is a little different. I can tell what is the defect in the kind of solar policy in that Sauragraha. Coming to the last one, yes, there is no excuse for the kind of lethargy. Bangalore is not Dhaka. It's not a backward country. There is no lack of money. Bangalore is not like Kabul, not a war-torn country. There are not many social unrest at all. Bangalore is not Lucknow. This one, Bangalore, is a science city. All kinds of experts, maybe global experts are here. Bangalore is a space city. Technology can be implemented immediately. This is a city of lakes and gardens. This is supposed to be the fastest growing city. And now there is no excuse for the future delay in implementing all the latest technology so that common man can also be involved in it and the benefits can be shared by it. That restore our earth. That is the slogan of this year's Earth Day. We can restore our earth and restore the energy deficiency of the common man and restore our beautiful city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful picture-rich presentation. And
I told
especially
you,
for taking us
my
back.
pictures will speak. ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೆ, ಪರವಾಗಿಲ್ಲ ಬಿಡಿ.
ಇಲ್ಲ, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದಾಗಿತ್ತು.
ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಅಲ್ಲ, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಲಿ, ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಲಿ, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೀಲಿ, ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬರಲಿ. You just can't move bureaucracy. You just cannot prevent policy paralysis. It is going to be like this only.
And
All
that's why
over
we're
the world
having
you have
such, discussions today, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And next we'll be having Mr. Chokkalingam on board. He'll be presenting us a wonderful view of his lifestyle and self-sustenance. Mr. Chokkalingam? Are you
Yes,
there?
thanks.
Come on board. Thank you.
I have a few pictures, like Hegde ಅವರು ಹೇಳಿದಾಗೆ, pictures speak louder. So I have put together a handful of pictures, and I will explain a bit about the lifestyle changes I made is 15 years old, building of my house, and it's on the suburbs on Bangalore Road. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ self-sufficient ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ we have just attempted. And design stage we said we will not have Bescom power, we will have only solar on the rooftop. And why we decided that 15 years back is ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಮಕ್ಕಳಾಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ವಡಾ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಪಪ್ಪಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಸಮ್ಮರಲ್ಲಿ. We use the terrace. We don't let the sun, go wasted. So today we have replaced vadam and papad with solar panels, and we are immensely benefited. We don't have a Bescom connection, and we just live off grid. Can we go to the next one? Karthik, next picture perhaps. Oh yeah, this house is made for thermal, designed and built for thermal comfort with rammed earth and compressed earth blocks. And of course, you will see the first picture where the honge trees are just growing, and then a fully grown tree after 10 years, you will see the house has disappeared. And the honges are providing us with oxygen and brings down the temperature with the, yeah, thanks, Karthik, I'll do that.
Can you go into presentation mode?
Yeah, can you make it full screen? I think it's the top right. It says present. Right there. To the right side. Right side. Move your cursor to the right. A little more. To the right end of it. More. Yeah, there you'll see that. Present. Wonderful. Thank you, sir. Now you can carry on.
Yeah. So the honge trees in front of my house have grown fully, and the house is not seen, but it is giving us oxygen, and it's giving us, which is the need of the hour. And it's also provides the temperature that we need in summer, which is typically 4 degrees lower than the rest of the area. So our house does not have air conditioners. We use the fans probably a couple of months. And this is the rooftop solar that we have. It's 2.2 kilowatts. It used to be only 1.5. We added 700 watts just before the previous lockdown, that is last year. So we can use an induction stove. So now we use an induction stove too, for a couple of hours every day. That's been of immense help. You would also see the house is about 3,000 square feet, and the solar panels have taken up about 150 square feet. That is all it takes. So the rest of the terrace is for Vadam and Papat. Should we go to the next one? Okay, there were some veggies and all that in the previous slide. Can you go back? Okay. Okay. So we have lots of openings in the roof and things like that. So sunshine is always there in the house. It's never a dull moment. The sun is always welcome, and many hues. We use them for many purposes. The next one, perhaps. We grow a lot of vegetables and greens. We have grey water recycling, which is used in the garden. So namdalli one chotnir kuda horage hogodilla. We don't waste even a drop of water. We use everything in the house itself. So zero waste in terms of water. These vegetables are also fed with compost made out of kitchen waste. Our community, neighborhood also has taken up so many things. They supply us with compost, additional treated water from the city. There's so many things. I can explain that later, maybe the next one. So there is also these questions that people come with solar and what will happen to the panels, recycle and the electronic waste and e-waste and things like that. There is Tatas have already established a recycling plant for lithium-ion batteries, and solar panels. I have not heard of anybody in India who's recycling. For the moment, we have repurposed it. The first one is a table made out of automobile waste as a frame, and then the panel as a tabletop. The second one is as a notice board. And there are so many imaginative ways that it can be used until a recycling plant is set up. It will happen, I'm sure. So it may not be really a problem. Yeah, the next one. This is a biodigester designed by DRDO. This was retrofitted about 7 years back. And this treats black water. So even black water is repurposed, reused in the garden. So normally zero waste. So this just takes 1 meter by 1 meter space, and it is fed with cow dung based bacteria. And there's no maintenance at all. Once in a way, I mix some cow dung and water and pour it down the drain. That's about it. There's no maintenance at all. We only have to be careful not to use heavy cleaners like Harpic or acid-based cleaners, we'll have to use milder detergents. That is the only care that we take. That's about it, about how we live as an individual. We use the sun. We are happy if it shines because we produce power. We are happy if it rains because we harvest and collect rainwater. So everything is for free. We just have to arrange things in a fashion that we are able to use it, what nature would give us for free. Idu namma community, neighborhood, we are kind of 500 plots. It's a private layout. The association, the president, Mr. Subbu Hegde, is also a participant in this webinar. I see his name here. We have done a wonderful job in the last 10 years. Our STP is operational for the last 20 years. And like Mr. Nagesh Hegde said, in our expansion, we will have to look at producing biogas. That also can be done. It will be tremendous use of waste here. And entire kitchen waste of the colony is composted, leaf litter is composted and supplied back to the residents for their terrace garden and kitchen garden. We harvest as a neighborhood, we harvest every drop of water. So much so in the last 5 years, the water table has risen. Illi ivaga construction shuru madidare. Everybody will encounter water when they dig for foundation. That is how it is now. We are water surplus. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was really nice hearing your humble and sustainable solutions on adopting such easy practices that can ease our lives with such sustainable living. And now coming to a few questions that our participants have. I would like to ask Mr. Rajesh, this was addressed by Mr. Subbu Hegde. One reason for reluctance of Bangaloreans is frequent policy changes by the government of Karnataka on net metering of adopting rooftop solar solutions. Can there be a stable policy?
Yeah, this is KRC jurisdiction where we get this, and also from Government of India, many organizations, I mean, like CA, CRC, you know, I mean, this comes up where we have to know bring in some sort of a balance in the sense that suppose let us imagine that the high-end consumers, if we allow for net metering, then that really don't work for DISCOMs. DISCOMs are already having are in a bad financial shape. I mean, DISCOM is doing well because we have a buoyancy in Bangalore. So it works for the whole state when a decision is taken. So to that extent, I mean, see, the major constraint for DISCOMs is the huge power purchase cost that is on one side, including transmission. The second is that if you look at the IP sets that that we service, so completely it's free power. Like it's a for government of Karnataka. Last year it was about 11,400 crores. It will be 14,000 crores this year. So if you look at BESCOM, our cost of supply is 8.17, but what we get on behalf, I mean, with respect to IP sets, is about 3.90 rupee. So there is already I mean, stress on the distribution company to to run the show. So net metering, we definitely want the consumers, particularly residential consumers, to really go ahead where we have this, I mean, a smaller quantum which is allowed. So probably we have on December 9th, 2020, KRC came out with the different models where each one of this issue is addressed. The business models, as all of you know, is the consumer-centric model, the utility-centric model, and the third-party investment model. So, I mean, if it is taken out in one hand, then it is also the third party is allowed. So these are all policies after a lot of consultations with different, academic institutions and a lot of practitioners and scholars of energy supply. So finally, a decision is taken. So this is to balance the whole thing on all sides. Thank you.
Gowda, I agree. Right now, the policy looks attractive, but the problem is every 2 years it changes. Sometimes it looks attractive. Sometimes we feel it's too risky to invest in a solar panel on a rooftop because net metering may not. Maybe 1 year back there was a rumor that net metering may be stopped. So there is no stable policy. This is the problem.
No, metering as of now is clear from the both Ministry of Power, Government of India, and also from KRC that definitely we would like to encourage this the retail consumers, particularly the domestic sector, where the residential consumers. But definitely megawatt scale net metering will not be possible. To offset that, we have allowed for regulator has allowed for a third party investment in that. So, a balance will prevail.
Because it's going to be a long-term decision by individual householders, there should be an assurance that if they invest, they should get back the money in 10 years at least.
Yeah, definitely. See, with the central financial assistance for the residential consumers, about 40% in less than 3 kilowatt and 20% for in more than 3 kilowatt. And it will be a PPA between power purchase agreement between BESCOM and all three of us. So that should not be once an agreement is signed, there is an estoppel from our side. So
if the BESCOM makes that policy statement, then it will be easy because we directly deal with BESCOM and not with the regulatory commission.
Yeah, definitely. That's the procedure as of now, that we are going to sign PPAs. So the PPAs will go for a long time. Absolutely no issues. Thank you.
Yeah. So Ms. Tejal has to.
Sir, may I come in on this point?
One second. I'll finish with Ms. Tejal and then we'll come back.
The same thing.
All right, because she has to leave the session early. So Ms. Tejal, there's a question for you from Satvika. What do you think about government set targets? Are they realistic or unreasonable? And how do transitions due to such targets affect the lower economic sections of the society?
By targets, I'm assuming she means renewable energy targets?
Yeah, renewable energy targets.
We are in a situation now where targets are coming directly from the PMO. And you have this 450 gigawatt. I'm not even sure we're going to reach the 175 gigawatt by 2022. And it is not for lack of trying. What is happening, people who are in official positions, MD of BESCOM, etc., cannot speak out publicly about these things, but they're scrambling to manage the system when you have huge amounts of input from infirm sources without an adequate amount of, on the other hand, let's say storage capacity. Right now we don't have any, but right now we have a system where the amount of renewable energy you can probably manage with the hydro, etc., that we have. But what it has resulted in is large costs in terms of what I spoke about earlier, idling charges. All of the DISCOMs have to pay capacity charges already to developers, to producers. You've had an equivalent amount of coal capacity, new coal capacity that has come in, not just renewable energy capacity. And you've had renewable energy capacity come in, which has what is known as must-run status, right? And currently the cost, while the variable cost is considered to be zero, the total cost of renewable energy is higher than the cost of coal. While the newer plants are cheaper, the older plants that have been installed in Karnataka was one of the first states to install renewable energy capacity. So the average cost that is being paid for solar is actually higher. So what it means is that the average cost of supply, power purchase for the distribution utility actually ends up being higher because of policies set by, the central government. So there is a huge difference between, the distribution and unfortunately what has happened, if you see with the kind of amendments, etc., that have been proposed to the Electricity Act, what has happened is there is an attempt to shift the blame onto the DISCOMs. The DISCOMs are inefficient, they cannot recover money, they cannot do this, they cannot do that. But there is a whole lot of policy that is actually forced top down that is resulting in really the really bad financial conditions of the DISCOMs. And you've had a pandemic here in which this has gotten exacerbated. So I think there is a huge problem here in terms of setting targets, how they are set. Targets have to be set taking into consideration local conditions. I'm not saying the DISCOMs have had the best record in terms of projecting, requirements for the future and planning for them. Not necessarily, they can do much better. But I mean, if one has to apportion blame for, either not meeting targets or for the fact that trying desperately to meet those targets has led to a huge increase in cost currently. And that cost is transferred on to consumers. And the consumers that suffer the most are definitely those who cannot afford to pay the full costs. And then you have a problem because you have to cross-subsidize. The DISCOMs also cannot simply charge consumers, huge amounts of money. They're not going to get the revenue back. And this is what Mr. Gowda was also saying. They have some paying consumers. They have some, DISCOM has some leeway. But GESCOM, for example, doesn't have that leeway. Right? They need to have paying consumers who will be able to bear that additional cost so that it doesn't get transferred on to the poor consumers. But eventually, if it means that the DISCOMs are also doing financially badly, it is a problem. So there has to be a much more regional determination of targets, and targets can't simply be arbitrary. They cannot be, I mean, right now, I would say that a lot of it is based on, some assessments of potentials and things like that. But there has to also be an assessment of the capacity to absorb. How much agricultural load do you have? How much of your category of consumers in the state are subsidized, right? How much will you be therefore be able to absorb costs? You have this coupled with policies of allowing captive generation, open access. All your paying consumers are leaving the DISCOMs, going out and making their own contracts for power purchase. How is it that the DISCOMs are going to manage their finances when they're also forced to buy a lot of the infirm power at high cost and keep their coal plants idling? So I think the situation needs, I mean, if you're talking about the larger electricity sector, of course, the situation needs handling at a policy level, which cannot be done at an individual DISCOM level. The individual DISCOMs have a limited amount of leeway in terms of policy. They can decide what to do within their jurisdiction, within the constraints that are set by larger policy, which I think needs to change. And it's a long answer, but I think the current sort of policy push for setting targets like this directly from the top, I think is not a very good idea. Right now, given the kind of crisis we are in, economic crisis as well, not just the health crisis, I think some amount of rethinking of the targets is necessary. I will be brief with my comments. I think I'm going to leave anyway, so I won't have a chance to respond again.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your wonderful answer and detailed answer. And moving forward, Mr. Nagesh Hegde, Leo,
Yeah.
I think it's better if you only talk.
Yeah,
We just wanted to highlight the point, Nagesh, that if you actually look at the way in which waste to energy plants are being promoted, the one you mentioned, it leads to concentration of waste ex situ. It's not within the city, it's way away from the city. So there is a transport cost which is never factored in. And if you minus the transport cost to the energy generated, it doesn't add up. Secondly, incinerator plants create a huge amount of health damage. So that is one thing we should be very, very careful about. I understand energy extraction at the local level, if waste is segregated from biomethanation and material is recycled, is far more eminent. And this is one of the things that we are discussing with the High Court now and BBMP and so on. And I'm just worried that if you push for waste energy, like Bombay has got a public hearing tomorrow, to generate energy from 600 tons of waste, which will be concentrated outside of the city, because in the city there's no space. So I'm just imagining how many trucks have to move that waste every day and back. So we have to be very careful about these type of technologies. Some of them are being dumped also.
Yeah, Leo, I agree with you that incineration is of the last priority. You may have seen it. At the end of my lecture, I gave that as compared to the open air burning that we are doing every day at 120 places in Bangalore every day. And we remain silent. All that dioxin, all that furon, everything is coming out and reaching us, getting into our lungs.
Completely.
Compared to that, that's why I give you that Rudra example of Pune, the doctors. They collect it at local level, take it a little far away, and they do the destructive distillation, something like, I don't know the technology, but it's been proven. It's been approved by the government, and it's supposed to be. I'm not, even now, I'm not propagating it. What I want is that why can't we collect methane, bottle it, and give it to the people nearby around so that your transport expenditure is also taken care of. Say, for example, Mawali, you can anytime you can drill a borehole, small borehole of about 30 feet, and you can get the gas out of that, do the methanization, bottle it, and distribute it to the nearby people, convincing them properly. That's the most important thing. I've been talking to these STP people. Why are you not producing biogas out of that? They say the biggest thing is that people have very suspicious thing about that. You are not convincing. That's why I told you that Bill Gates himself had come there and shown it. It is quite safe. Even some of the senators in Singapore had actually drank it and chewed. I don't want our prime minister to do so when he says that we can generate energy out of the sewage. But at least chief minister, if not chief minister, our irrigation minister, our MLAs can actually demonstrate it so that all our 800 or so STPs all over Karnataka can have these kind of things. That will be kind of a decentralized cooking energy possibilities there. And I have my own comment regarding the question posed to Dr. Rajesh Gowda. Why rooftop solar is not catching up in Bangalore? The most important reason is that you have not created awareness yet. You assume that everybody knows. I have been speaking to the civil engineers, these chota-mota contractors, they are not aware of it. Quite a few architects do not know. Take them into confidence. Tell them these are the advantages. And for a building, for an owner who spends 2 lakh rupees for his puja house, using all this Amrita Shile and all, he can easily afford to spend 2 lakh rupees for a rooftop, but he does not know it. And the government and the bureaucrats do not know that there is such a huge ignorance all over the city. Did they ever put any hoarding about that? Did they give any advertisement, open advertisement in newspapers or TVs or radios that new scheme Sauragraha is coming? Nothing. You assume that we know, everybody knows it. Probably, if you create proper awareness, many more people will come forward.
ನಾಗೇಶ್ ಗೌಡ್ರೆ,
Yeah.
ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಲ್ಲ, ನಾನು ರಾಜೇಶ್ ಗೌಡ್ರಿಗೆ ಇದೇ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ನಾನು ರಿಟೈರ್ ಆದ್ಮೇಲೆ I wanted to put up a solar plant. I am from AG's office. We audited KEB those days. ಅವಾಗ್ಲಿಂದಾನು ನನಗೆ ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಅನುಭವ ಇದೆ. ಜೊತೆಗೆ I wanted to put up a solar panel. ಅದು it was costing almost 4 lakhs in those days.
Yes.
ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅವಾಗ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಟ್ ಇದನ್ನ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ 8,500 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಏನೋ ಕೊಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಮಾತು ಬಂತು. I was a little interested. I wanted to put up. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇವತ್ತೇನಾಗಿದೆ 2 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾನು ಲಕ್ಷಾಂತರ ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟು 2 ರೂಪಾಯಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಒದ್ದಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾ? ಇದು ಒಂದು ಕ್ವಶನ್. ಎರಡನೇದು, I just want to request, sir, this is a simple mirror. During daytime, people are misusing electricity for lighting purpose in their houses. ಇದನ್ನ ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಕಿಟಕಿಯಿಂದ ಇಟ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಇದೇ ತರ ಡಿಫ್ಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಡಿಫ್ಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನನ್ನ ರೂಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ 2 ಲೈಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಸಿಟಿ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇದೇ ತರ ಬ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಾಗ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಕಡೆ ಎಲ್ಲಾದ್ರೂ ಆಗ್ಲಿ ಮಿಸ್ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದನ್ನ ನೀವು ಪ್ರೊಪಗೇಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು you can save a lot of lakhs of units of electricity being misused. ಅದು ಒಂದು. ಇನ್ನೊಂದು, ಸಾರಿ ಐ ಆಮ್ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಯಿಂಗ್. ನಾನೊಬ್ಬ ಫಾರ್ಮರ್. ರಾತ್ರಿ 3 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ನೀವು ನನಗೆ IP ಸೆಟ್ಗೆ ಕನೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಕೊಟ್ರೆ ನನಗೆ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಹೋಗೋಷ್ಟೊತ್ತಿಗೆ ಬಹಳ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗತ್ತೆ. ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಉದ್ದಕ್ಕೂ ಹಾವು ಚೇಳುಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾಟ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಇದನ್ನ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿ ನೀತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದ್ರೆ, ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ರಾತ್ರಿ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾನು ಭತ್ತ ಹಾಕಿದ್ರೆ ನನಗೆ ಆ ನೀರ್ ಹಾಯಿಸ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬಹಳ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗತ್ತೆ.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಮೈಸೂರು ಮಟ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಬಯೋಡೈಜೆಸ್ಟರ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಾ, ಬಯೋಗ್ಯಾಸ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಾ, ಅದರಿಂದ ನೀವು ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಸಿಟಿ ಜನರೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು ನೀವು ಬೇಕಾದಷ್ಟು.
ಸರ್ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು, ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ ಫಾರಿನ್ ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ಗಳು ಅವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಹಾಕೊಂಡು ಅಲ್ಲ ಸರ್, ನೀವು ಲಕ್ಷಾಧಿಪತಿಗಳಿಗೆ ನೀವ್ ಹೇಳಿ ಒಪ್ಕೋತೀನಿ. ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಆಗುತ್ತಾ? ನೀವ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿದೀರಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಹಾಕೊಳಕ್ ಆಗುತ್ತಾ? ಐ ಆಮ್ ಅನ್ ಆರ್ಡಿನರಿ ಪರ್ಸನ್.
ಅಲ್ಲ ರೀ, ಗೋಬರ್ ಗ್ಯಾಸ್ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ನೀವು ನಮ್ಮ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗೆ ಬಂದು ಹೋಗಿ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ವರ್ಷಕ್ಕೆ 1.5 ಲಕ್ಷ ರೂಪಾಯಿ ಸಂಪಾದನೆ ಇದ್ದವನು ಕೂಡ ಗೋಬರ್ ಗ್ಯಾಸ್ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಹಾಕೊಂಡಿರ್ತಾನೆ. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಸಿಂಪಲ್, ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ವೆರಿ ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ಲಿ ಎಟ್ ಆಲ್.
That's right. So moving forward with the last question of the session, since we're running out of time, to Mr. Chokkalingam, I'm going to ask a question by Ashwin. Whenever we take up any activity or any sort of anthropogenic intervention in natural ecosystems, we are disturbing balance. So at the policy level, societal level, we must approach issues with nature appropriate behavior. What is your opinion on the Green Building Code initiative?
Green Building Code, we can go beyond that with traditional knowledge. Green Building Code is for engineers of modern education, where they bring in ideas which I don't understand. For instance, when I got into designing or thinking about building a house, there was no Green Building Code specific to India. So our time nalli dial-up internet nalli I searched and found US Green Building Code. And then I stopped where they said you need to have operable windows. Andre nam kidikina open ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. In America, that was a wonder, it was something new. Everything is shut there. Either the house is artificially cooled or artificially heated. So they shut everything up. Whereas here, it is not like that. We open windows. But increasingly in urban India, it is happening that people are not opening their windows and then having air conditioning. So it is a bit alien. And they don't take into many things which are practical and which are prevalent here in traditional knowledge. If they can take that into account, it will be great. Green Building Code can.
Thank you, sir. So before I wrap up the session, I would like to remind you that this webinar series will continue till 17th May, every Monday, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Our next session is on 3rd May 2021. The topic is Securing Clean Air and Inclusive Mobility in Bengaluru, where we will try to understand what it will take for Bengaluru to get off its high dependency on private vehicular usage, make way for non-motorized transport, and minimize vehicular pollution. I request everyone present here to join us again next week and also share details about this webinar series amongst your networks. And recordings and reports of our previous sessions are accessible at esgindia.org as usual. And with this, I once again thank all our speakers for participating in an enriching and thought-provoking discussion. I am also grateful to our participants who registered for the session, the entire team at ESG, my colleagues, ESG interns, and volunteers from Yugma Network for helping put together this session, webinar series. I wish you all a very good night and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Mr. Gowda.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh Gowda and Nagesh. So